Okay, well, then good morning, everyone, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour. This week, we will be pleased and honored to welcome Tim Pratt, who I will admit, I'm looking at the admit side, who I will introduce shortly. But first, today is March 18th. 2021, and this is part of the Will Work for Food program. It was founded by Natalie Armstrong-Moten and Jeff Kachavan, my co-moderator, and another brainchild of this New Possibilities Hour. And all we do is ask that everybody who attends donate money to either the food bank or the charity of their speaker, or to their favorite charity. So, and if you let us know, any one of us, how much you have donated, then we add it to this running total. And I know there have been so many more donations, I'm sure, than even Natalie knows about and has been keeping track of. But Jeff, where are we today?
Jean, thank you so much. Our audiences are so incredibly generous with the food banks designated by our speakers and others. I'm just so excited to say that we've now, we're close to $90,000 since we began this program. The total as of today is $89,065. And so our colleagues in the ADR and litigation communities, you've just been so generous. Thank you all so much for your contributions to food banks, and we're looking forward to many more contributions in honor of Tim Pratt and the wonderful presentation we know he's going to make today. Back to you, Jean. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Isn't it amazing? Almost $100,000 since the spring, and that's just what Natalie knows about. So anyway, thank you all so much. That's just great. That's feeding quite a large number of people, a lot of meals. Anyway, let's get on to it. Today, I'm so honored and pleased to introduce Tim Pratt. Tim, I've known for many, many years, and he's a wonderful person. And in his professional life, and aside from being a wonderful person, he's a former Executive Vice President, Chief Administrative Officer, and General Counsel at Boston Scientific. And before that, he was a trial lawyer with national practice at Shook, Hardy and Bacon. He has served as president of the Federation of Defense and Corporate Counsel and of Lawyers for Civil Justice. Tim has been selected as one of the best lawyers in America. Legal 500 named him to the Corporate Counsel 100, which identifies the most powerful corporate legal advisors in the United States. And in 2016, he was honored by the Burton Award as a legend in law. He is a frequent speaker on topics such as leadership, ADR, happiness, the law, and lawyering. So Tim will rely on his vast experience as a trial lawyer, mass tort litigation expert, and client to discuss today with us how a CEO, CFO, and General Counsel view issues such as mediating over litigating, the timing of mediation, who should attend on behalf of the company, what strategies maximize the chances of success, and of all the mediators out there, how to find the one who matches best the needs and interests of a corporate client. So without further ado, I turn the floor over to you, Tim, and if you tell us about your preferred charity or food bank first. It's more than a food bank, it's also a food bank. But tell us about that, and then the floor is yours, and can't wait to hear what you say. Thank you so much.
Well, I hope everybody can hear me okay. Thanks for that introduction, Jean. It's very, very kind. And I feel like, I'm running a public television, telethon. Good. Let's get over $90,000. Come on, chip in. I'll match the first 1,000 or something. But the charity that I'm here to sort of promote is called City Union Mission. It's based here in Kansas City. It's about 100 years old, and it kind of lives to provide warm beds, nutritious food, and shelter, places of safety for People are impoverished, people are homeless, men, women, children, families. It's got shelters, it has food banks, it's got recovery programs, it has after-school programs for children, summer camps for children, thrift stores. It does a lot of things for people in need, people who need food, people who need money, people who need shelter, people who need safety, and people who really need hope. And I'm a big supporter of it. It doesn't take money from the government, from United Way. It's all based on people like us. So thank you for considering it. cityunionmission.org is the name of is a website. So it seems like I'm going to be talking about a lot today, according to Gene. I think I should start with this. You know, who am I? One thing I'm not is a mediator. I'm not, never have, never will. I admire mediators. I mean, they've got that ability to be calm and cool and work through obstacles and all of that. My personality isn't that. I mean, if I were a mediator, about 20 minutes into it, I'd say to one side, you need to move here. I'd say to the other side, you need to move there. And if they say no, I'd go, okay, we're done. That's it. Go. Don't waste my time. Out of my office. Go. And that doesn't make a good mediator. That's for sure. So I kind of know what I can do pretty well and things I can do very poorly, and mediation is probably something I can do very poorly. One thing I did for the first 30 years of my professional career was, you know, I was one of the hired guns for big companies with a lot of big litigation. That's what I did for Shook, Hardy & Bacon. I tried cases around the country. I did mediation on all sorts of cases. Some of them one-off cases here, there, and everywhere. A lot of mass tort cases, a lot of class actions, MDL cases. I mediated hundreds and hundreds of cases, and the ones that didn't work out, I tried them. But that's sort of what I did. I was in a way that the hired gun. You know, I'll do what you want me to do. I'll go in and fight for you in the mediation room. If we don't do it there, I'll fight for you in the courtroom. And I really enjoyed that, and was privileged that companies continue to hire me to do that kind of work. And then in 2008, I had a shift of things. I was hired to be, as Gene mentioned, Executive Vice President, General Counsel, Chief Administrative Officer, and Corporate Secretary of Boston Scientific. Some of you may know Boston Scientific, some of you may not. It's one of the largest medical device companies in the world, revenues of over $10 billion. It's got 27,000 employees around the world. In my job there, I had hundreds, on occasion, thousands of people reporting up into me. I was a member of the executive committee. I was sitting on the C-suite with the CEO and CFO and all the other division presidents. And so that's sort of, you know, what I did. The other important thing about Boston Scientific, you know, is when I went there in 2008, they had a lot of litigation. They had intellectual property litigation. They had government, criminal, and civil investigations. They had class actions. They had mass tort matters. So they had a lot of litigation, not just in the United States, but internationally, in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. And it was sort of my job as a general counsel to help manage that to conclusion. So I certainly enjoyed it, but it changed my perspective a bit, if you will. Because no longer was I the hired gun, which is what a mediator is in a way, and outside counsel is in a way. I was the client. I was the one who had the most to gain or lose from mediation. So I cared more about it because the outcome had really significant implications to me, either favorable or unfavorable. So when you start seeing things through the eyes of the client, you start going, okay, how do we decide what matters to mediate? How do we pick a mediator? And so when I moved in-house, for the time I was there, for that long period of time, it was a perspective I'd never seen as an outside lawyer about how a major company at the C-suite executive level manages litigation. But there's a caveat to that. I learned that there are kind of two kinds of litigation in a major company like Boston Scientific. One of it, volume-wise, probably the greatest, are these one-off products cases, commercial cases, you know, just employment cases, disputes, individual against the company. You know, we took those seriously and they actually meant a lot to the people involved. But at the end of the day, I, as a general counsel, didn't really pay much attention to those. You know, we mediated them, but often we were forced to mediate. And somebody would say, we got this case in San Diego. It's a one-off case involving an alleged product defect. We need to mediate. We'll pick a mediator. You know, here's the authority. Go forth and conquer and tell me how it goes. You know, I wasn't very much involved, and certainly other people on the C-suite were not involved. They had no idea. This is just kind of the running of business for a major company. But then there are those other cases. These are the high-profile cases, the cases that threaten the financial well-being, the reputational interest, the commercial interest of a major company. And those got my attention. And those got the attention of people on the C-suite. I'm talking about someone claiming that one of their patents infringed one of our best-selling products, or a government investigation, or a class action, or a trade secret matter, a big dispute, antitrust, these kinds of things that could really have a significant impact on the company in so many different ways. Well, those are the ones we paid attention to. And those are the ones we sort of talked about because we wanted to find out, and I'm talking now about we meaning the CFO and the CEO. What's our risk of winning or losing on this thing? A lot of people are talking about it. You know, what are the odds if we take this thing out to conclusion? What's it going to cost us? If we lose, what's the outcome? How much is it going to cost us in terms of defense? I mean, so what's the financial outlay on this? So, and there are people watching these things. You know, I mean, there are people, there are shareholders, investors, analysts, the media paying attention to these kinds of things because they can have an impact on the company. So if they're watching it, certainly executives are watching it. And so you would sit down and you'd want to talk about those things like what's the risk, what's the financial outlay, what's it going to cost? What is not just the financial cost to the company, what's the non-financial risk associated with this litigation? Can you get enjoined? Can you be forced to stop doing what you're doing? Can one of your products be ordered off the market? Which happens, by the way, in patent litigation in Europe. One bad ruling and you're off the market in places like Germany. What's the disruption to the company and its business and its people? The people who have to give testimony, people who have to dig out documents, people who have to go to trial, people whose job description doesn't say, you know, work with lawyers 8 hours a day. So what's the disruption to them? What are the implications of settling the case? Is it over? Is there going to be a tail of litigation after it? You know, these are the things, and then we start talking about what the alternatives are. You're sitting in a room, you got the executives around the table, the division president, and the other people in the C-suite. The kinds of things that we talked about on these major matters are this: whether to mediate, when to mediate, who the mediator ought to be, who should attend on behalf of the company, and what's our mediation strategy. Those are the kinds of things that are discussed by people like the executives in the company. So let me take those sort of, if you will, kind of one at a time. Whether to mediate. You know, we all know the risks of like litigating a case through the torturous history of filing, through discovery, through document production and experts and trial and post-trial. And we know all of that. It's significant in terms of cost. To the extent that this litigation creates dark clouds in the sky over the company, those clouds persist for a year, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years. The cost is significant. I mean, some of this litigation, you may pay millions of dollars just to get to trial, for the privilege of paying a couple of $1 million to get through trial. And if you lose financially, then you add that to the mix before you even start the appellate process. It's a long process. The proceedings are very open. People pay attention to it. They can go to the courtroom. They can watch the trial. It's hard to keep things confidential. A lot of disruption for people in the company. Right. So that's what we say. That's the scenario if we fight this thing out to the end. So the CEO or CFO might say, what's the alternative to it? Okay, well, we can mediate. Okay, so what's involved in that? Well, less publicity, obviously, because you're doing it in a closed setting and people aren't sitting up in the back benches commenting on what everybody has to say. So there's less scrutiny. Analysts aren't looking over your shoulders. Journalists aren't looking over your shoulders. It's cheaper because it's faster. Less discovery, often. Time from beginning to end is shorter if it's successful. May not be successful. There's less risk of runaway outcomes. If you think the amount at risk is $4 million and you get a jury coming back at $50 million, yeah, I've had that happen, by the way. You don't get that in mediation. I mean, you don't have someone sitting there saying, I'm ordering you to pay this. It's an opportunity to kind of talk about, you know, ups and downs and risk and merits and kind of what we ought to do. So less risk of runaway outcomes. You certainly have more control over the proceedings. You certainly have more control of the confidentiality of the proceedings. If you have something filed even confidentially in a district court clerk's office, well, it's a court order away from being public. Less so when it comes to mediation. That is a confidential process. So I say to them, you know, it may be a good idea to just sort of give it a try. See what it's like. There's no harm, it costs you a little bit of money. And they go, okay, that's a good idea. So the question is, when in this process do you do it? Okay, you got the beginning, you got, you know, the end, you got this litigation that could go on forever. When do you do it? Do you do it really, really early when you may signal a sign of weakness and before you have a lot of information? Maybe, maybe not. You wait to the end, to the eve of trial, after all of the money and all of the emotions and passions and expectations are locked in, and people go, well, why don't we just leave it at the jury? We're at the 1 yard line. Let's see if we can score a touchdown. Why do we ever care about it? There is a sweet spot in here in terms of when to mediate, in my view, and this is what I look for. You certainly owe it to yourself as a client to get information. Okay, that's important to the mediation process. It's important for the mediator. I mean, because if you don't, I mean, information is both ammunition and a shield. If it's a he said, she said kind of thing with no substantiation or documentation, I mean, that's like fighting a war with Nerf guns. I mean, what do you do? So you need something. If you're going to claim it's fraudulent, if you're going to claim that this person's not entitled to any money, or this person is embellishing injuries, you need some information. So I think you have to gather that information. You owe it to yourself, to your stakeholders, to the mediator, to at least get some information. But how long do you wait? You know, I always kind of like the idea of doing some discovery by some document discovery, some depositions, fact depositions, and some maybe even expert disclosures. If you have a question about whether the other side can even get an expert to support their cause, to at least glimpse at what they have. Maybe not take their deposition, but that's sort of in the area of like expert disclosures is where I find you're going to have a lot of expense going forth. You have a lot of information, and kind of in that general area is a pretty good place to say, you know, now's not a really bad time to go out to see if we have an opportunity to mediate. So we decide when to do it. And then we say, who do we hire? Who do we get? Who's the mediator? Well, you know, as I said, if it's a small one-off matter, in my example of San Diego, You just want someone local, someone who's got a lot of experience with these kinds of matters, someone who may know the judge, certainly someone who knows the parties, the law firms. So I leave that to them. But on big matters, high profile matters, it's a different dynamic because you're going to want people, local is not so important. Often in those matters, you've got law firms all over the country working with you. And the judge may be less important to the process. So you want someone who's sort of experienced in these kinds of high profile matters. Sometimes you want to have sort of specialized expertise. If it's an IP case, it's kind of important for them to know kind of what a Markman hearing is and sort of the language around IP stuff. Same with government work and trade secrets, class actions. So you may look for someone who's got some specialized expertise. You certainly want someone who's acceptable to the other side. A lot of these high profile things are big versus big. Company against company, me against the government. So, these are fairly sophisticated people. So they have views on who they want. So you can't really force a mediator on anybody, but you also want someone that, as I said, yeah, this is someone I think would be really good. Someone who's got the right temperament to deal with the big personalities in a room when you deal with high profiles. I'll talk about who's in the room in a little bit. And it takes a certain style to be able to kind of manage those kinds of things. And certainly someone, because these are tough and complicated matters, someone who's strong, who's innovative, who's a hard worker, who's willing to roll up the sleeves, and she can really get things done as a mediator. So, where do I find out about these people? Well, our own experience, we do enough mediation, we kind of know who worked and didn't work in these kinds of settings. We also ask law firms, we ask fellow general counsel. I did it all the time. I've got this matter, it's a big intellectual property matter pending here. Who have you used is successful? And it's amazing how candid fellow general counsel are about people who work and maybe just as importantly, people who won't work. So, okay, now we got a mediator picked up. Now we have even a mediation set. All right, we're ready to rock and roll. So who should attend for the company? I'm talking now about these high profile matters. Should the general counsel go? I went to some, not all, because I think if I showed up, general counsel of a Fortune 300 company, that sent the signal that, wait, maybe they're worried about this. So I'd go if the other side's general counsel would go. I'd sometimes bring a division president in to the extent that there's an issue about the commercial activities and just how you navigate through those. I'd bring in the division president. I'd certainly bring in, someone who's like the intellectual property expert in my department, if it's an IP case, because they know the language, they certainly work through this whole thing. So you want someone who's got experience in mediations on your side of the table for sure. I kind of brought that to the general counsel role because of my background. You want someone to know enough about the case and the issues to be constructive in the process, and someone who's really high enough in the organization to speak for the organization and to be able to say, this is where the company is. Someone who may have talked to the board about it and who can speak with that kind of confidence when it comes to kind of mediating through the process. So now we've decided all of that. The final thing we talked about on the eve of mediation as a C-suite group of people is, what's our mediation strategy? It was amazing to me because I was with a company that acquired lots of other companies. And most of these major companies, major publicly held companies in particular, they acquire companies all the time. And it was interesting to me being a part of that process and being a part of the whole mediating high profile cases, how similar they are when you're sitting down with executives. And they'd sit there and go, so what is this worth to us? I'm talking now about the matter in litigation, not the company. What is this worth to us? Why do we really want to settle it? And what's the risk if we do? What's the risk if we don't? I talked about that, the ups and downs of whether we had to mediate or not. Or did we just fight this thing out? And what do we think it's worth? This asset, if you will, this maybe it's not an asset, it's a liability. What do we think it's worth? What's the dollar value we put on that? What would we be willing to pay to make it go away? Where do we start? Put you to buy a business all the time. What's our opening play? And what's our walkaway point? Those are the kinds of discussions you have when you go into a mediation with executives, because that's the way their business mind works. So that's what goes on in the C-suite. So we decided to mediate. We picked the best mediator on the planet to do it. We got the right people there. We got a strategy. We have it all figured out. So what could go wrong, with mediation? We planned this thing out so well. A lot of things can go wrong at this point because we're not even in the mediation room yet. Okay? I don't care how much planning it is. When you get there, it all changes. The dynamics are unexpected. The other side surprises you. There's a lot of things that can go wrong in the course of mediation. One, some cases just aren't going to be settled. Okay? And I've had some of those. And you've got good people on both sides. You've got the best mediator on the planet. The merits are clear, but you're not getting that sucker settled because the views are so different on either side. There's no way you're going to be able to reach a middle ground in mediation. That's what courtrooms are built for. You leave it to the jury, you leave it to the judge, and you just wash your hands up and go, we gave it a try, but there's nothing we can do. There's nobody's fault. They fail for that reason, if that's a failure, if you will. They also fail because the attorneys don't do what they need to do. And maybe I didn't do it perfectly well, and I likely didn't when I was the outside hired guy. I mean, you go into it, you get attorneys who are aggressive. They think it's a courtroom. They want to argue. They want to fight. They have the wrong temperament to be effective as mediation advocates. Because there's a skill set involved in this. And some of the best trial lawyers on the planet don't have those skill sets. So sometimes mediations blow up because the attorneys who are hired to represent the parties are out of control and the clients can't control them or don't want to or can't, and it blows up. It also gets blown up because of clients, okay? And it gets blown up because clients are inflexible. They're driven by passion and emotion and anger. And if you can't get that out of the room, you're not going to have a good meeting. I had a case in Indiana, a tragic case involving a 14-month-old girl who died and was using one of our products. We had proof that the product worked perfectly well. She didn't die because of our product, had nothing to do with it. The family didn't believe it. And we had a mediation, and the family walked in to the mediation, like 12 of them, with shirts that said, "Remember Samantha." Well, tragic, I understand it. As a father and grandfather, I understand it's a horrible case. But there was no way that case was going to be settled. No way. We tried it. Got a defense verdict affirmed on appeal, and the case really bothered me because of a 14-month-old little girl who died. So sometimes it's the clients that just can't, for lots of reasons, get together with the other side. Sometimes it's a mediator. Sometimes it's the mediator. So I want to spend kind of a little bit of time now talking about what happens in the mediation room and sort of the role of mediators in making things happen or not happen. Because you need to know, those of you who mediate for a living, we talk behind your back. When you go to the other room, we're muttering about blah, blah, blah. That's just what we do. And you get thick skins, you may not care about it, but we do. And so I want to talk about 10 things that clients like me may mutter when you're out of the room, things that may sort of impede the mediation process. And kind of the things you can do as mediators, maybe to keep that from happening or keeping that from becoming an impediment to a successful outcome. And I picked 10 because in the talks I give, 10's my number. I've given talks on the 10 commandments of rainmaking, 10 commandments of networking, 10 commandments of cross-examination, 10 rules to success in the practice of law, 10 keys to happiness. So much so that a buddy of mine gave me a little plaque once. It was a bronze number 10 that was encased in a frame. So you have to indulge me my predilection for 10s on this, but I'll move through pretty quickly. Those of you who are looking at your clock, I think I'll get this thing done in good order and have some questions maybe if you have them. So one thing that clients may say when a mediator leaves the room is that he doesn't even know what this case is about. I was in a mediation once, intellectual property case, and the mediator looked and said, wait a minute, were there 1 or 2 Markman hearings? But we submitted a 100-page brief on all of this stuff. We had attachments. We attached Markman hearing outcomes. It was critical to our case. So you hear that and you go, you're either lazy or you're forgetful. But in either case, how are you going to have credibility with me if you're stumbling over some of the most important things, I think, the facts that are key to this case? So what do? I mean, obviously you prepare. Okay, yeah, this is like, pay me great advice for prepare for the mediation. But prepare means you read everything people give you. It means you analyze it. It means you have questions. It means you write out those questions. It means at the end of all of that stuff that you read, it's not just a bunch of junk out there in your head. You've distilled the facts that are important and you have mastered those facts, and you're going to impress the parties with all that you know about the case. Not just the facts, but what's the strong point for the plaintiff, the strong point for the defendant, the weak point, back and forth. This is critical to gain the confidence and credibility with the parties, particularly in high profile matters, because these things are complicated. This isn't like I ran a red light. These are matters that involve discovery that's gone on for months, if not years. There's a lot of facts to distill, and to get the right ones, it's our job to sort of be able to tell you that as a party, but it's also your job to ask questions, to fill in the gaps. So prepare, master the case. The second case, question or statement that clients might mutter when you leave the room is, why does he keep asking us about that? And what I'm saying is, you need to understand as a mediator what is important to the case of these thousands of facts, of these bright lights shining on you. What are the things that are important to you? And you've got to be really careful with that, because if you distill it down and think this is an important issue and the other side doesn't think so, they're going to think you don't understand the case. If it's an important issue for the plaintiff and not for you, and you keep talking about its importance, the defendant's going to say you're biased. You're taking the plaintiff's side on this, because that's not the issue that ought to drive mediation. So how do you find out about this? Well, you do it by just talking to the parties and listening to them, listening to what they have to say. Asking questions. Here's a question I think you may not start off with it. Here's a great question to ask. What would be a good outcome for you today? Okay, now don't let them get by with dismissal with an apology. I mean, let's be realistic on this. But That kind of thing often isn't drilled out in the posturing papers filed by the outside lawyers. And you might start seeing hints of what's really important about it, because you might hear that money is not the most important thing to the defendant. May not be very important at all. I mean, one thing big companies have is a lot of money. You know, 10 billion, 20 billion, 50 billion, 100 billion dollars. So, you know, I mean, it's not, doesn't grow on trees, but it's not like a one-on-one individual thing. So it may not be the money at all. It may be that the company really wants freedom to operate. They want commercial freedom. They want a non-disparagement clause because of the other side's out telling all kinds of bad stories about it. They may want a covenant not to sue in the future. They just want peace. And they may even want, at the impasse point of a mediation, they just may simply want an agreement to arbitrate. They just want this done so badly, they're willing to throw it in the hands of an arbitrator to get it done. So you're gonna be able to get that information by asking them questions and talking to them, and not talking yourself. I've sat with mediators talk and talk and talk and talk. And one thing, a truism in life is that you can't talk and learn at the same time. So the great mediators ask the right questions and listen to the answers. The other thing people mutter is, I'm not sure we can trust this person. Whoa. I'm telling you what, if you're a party and the sense of the room is that they don't trust the mediator, that's it. I mean, suspicion just eliminates transparency and candor. And transparency and candor are the mediator's best tools when it comes to reaching a solution. So it's like a graph, you know, with a y-axis and x-axis. If you've got like posturing on the left and time on the right, would you expect a mediation to be as high on the left with posturing, and then drops down as time goes on? Because, okay, we're done with that. We had our sample. I feel like a virtual science teacher here talking about graphs and everything, but that's it. If you flatline on posturing at the top, the case will never get solved, because nobody's going to know what the people really want. And you'll find out what the people really want by building a relationship of trust and confidence with the other people in the room. You do it by not being disagreeable or contentious. And yes, believe it or not, I've been in the room with mediators who are both disagreeable and contentious. Didn't trust them. You don't present a truth, you know, just because the other side says so. Once you start sort of presenting the other side's story as truth, you're building a wall with the people who hear that going, wait a minute, that's not the case. You seem to be believing it. So you got to be open and likable and understanding. You got to build a relationship with the people in the room. If you do that, you build the kind of trust that is going to drive a successful outcome. The other thing that people would mutter behind your back, who does he think we are, his minions? I actually like this one. I was in a mediation once. I won't tell you who and I won't tell you where. Big matter. And on my side of the table was me, my division president who ran like a $4 billion business for the company. The other side had the chief IP officer. I mean, it was like a who's who of these companies, high-level executives and lawyers. We're sitting in the room, great big room, and this mediator comes out, solemn, sits at the end of the table and says, okay, here's how things are going to go. I'm going to give you 5 minutes for an opening statement. And then I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to ask a question. You look at me with the answer. You don't look to the other side. Only one person per side can talk at a time. Always look at me. Don't characterize what the other side says. Your job here is to talk about your side, not And I'm going, I hate this guy. And I met him like 2 minutes ago. And I get the rules, I get all of this kind of stuff, but if somebody comes in, and I'm now talking about that same, when I was in private practice, and I had like a one-off case and somebody walks in judge-like, I'm used to judges, okay? Okay, you're a little bossy, but I get it, okay, I'll go along with it. But if you got a room full of executives who they don't get in front of judges, and they're going, the hell, you know, what are we dealing with here? I mean, for executives, I mean, these are people who have run major businesses. I mean, they've been treated with respect by everybody under them. I mean, they people listen to them. They don't have people dictate to them what's going on. And to try to curry favor with a bunch of executives in mediation by coming out and basically saying, I'm the boss, I'm the emperor, you listen to me, it's not going to work. You can't be dictatorial to people who dictate to others for a living. You can't push around people who are in a position to push other people around. You can't try to shut up people who talk for a living. And you can't out-tough a bunch of executives who basically got to where they are by being tough. Okay. So don't do that. If you want trust, confidence, someone to really like you, don't do that. But on the other hand, by the way, the other end of it, don't be weak. Don't be obsequious, because we executives don't value that either. You know, we brought you in for a reason, and to sort of, oh, we agree with everything you say, and you know, that's going to be a discrediting feature for a mediator too. But just remember, respect the people in the room and earn their respect. The other thing people mutter, I'm getting down, watching the clock here, Jeff, Gene, you know, cut me off. If, I'm kind of impressed that this whole thing's working, because I spent most of my life, you know, with having somebody, you know, manage my schedule and my calendar and hook up, you know, these video things and all. I'm flying on a high wire right now, man. But I'm not a Zoom expert, so I hope you all still with me. I mean, I don't know, maybe I've been talking here to myself, but but we'll watch the clock. We got some questions. We'll get to them. So another thing that people sometimes mutter is that he talks all the time. He doesn't really care what we think. And that's kind of a variant of what I just said a little bit ago. I mean, people who come in and say, okay, here's how mediations are going to handle. You get this long form that's sent out from the mediator's office. It's one size fits all. And often one size doesn't fit all. And I try to make that point to you, that people, you know, the issues are different. The parties are different. The lawyers and the cases are different. So you know, I was on an ADR panel once, believe it or not. One of the questions was, well, should there be opening statements? And man, this one meeting, of course, there's always an opening. You have to have an opening statement. You got to the other side. No, that's too ridiculous. You got to have an opening statement. I'm sitting in the middle, and I said, doesn't it kind of depend? I mean, shouldn't you ask the parties? I mean, in the case of that, I told you about that case in Indiana involving, you know, Samantha. My view, I'm not a mediator, an opening statement in which the company lawyers are looking to this family talking about, well, you know, I'm sorry about the death of your little 14-month-old, but you know, we didn't do it. I'm not sure that's a great way to start a mediation, but that's just me. You know, it's your world, not mine. My point is, ask people questions. Do a pre-planning call. I can't do it for all of them, maybe there would be, but you know, in some of these big high-profile matters, I thought it's very effective when the mediator would call and say, hey, what do you think we ought to do? How's it work? Who should be there? And I think when you do that, you open yourself up to the idea that one size doesn't fit all. I think you're going to find that there are a lot of people who have maybe better ideas than you do about how this mediation can proceed and how to increase the chances of a good outcome. Couple more to go. The other one is, Sometimes they may say, why does he let those idiots in the other room drive the narrative? That's all part of anger and passion. And I think one of the most critical things that mediators can do, and the Goodmans do it better than anybody, is take the extraneous out of the room. There is emotion, there's passion, principles at stake. There's I've been involved in matters where a company claimed that, a company stole, in a merger agreement, stole another company from them and deprived them of the opportunity of what that company had to offer. I mean, it's an emotional thing in a commercial sense. And so, but you've got to somehow get the irrelevant and the passion and the emotion out of the room. And sometimes it's hard to do. Sometimes it can't be done. Remember Samantha. But let them vent. Listen to them. Don't tell them they can't talk. And then once they get out of it, hopefully things get down to the real merits of the matter. Another thing that I see taught way, way, way too much is when someone says that mediator's like a carrier pigeon, just carrying messages back and forth. Drove me crazy. I mean, it's like, okay, the mediator might say, okay, I think if you go to X, they'll come to X. All right, we'll go to X. Mediator comes by and says, no, I couldn't get them to X. I got to Y. What say you? Okay, I say you're a bad mediator. That's what I say. I mean, I say that because all you're doing is basically, no solution. No, I'm not faulting the person for being wrong on the guess because those things happen. But the idea of just coming in and going, okay, there's so-and-so, what's your move? That doesn't do any good at all. If I can hire somebody off the street to carry bag money back and forth. And it's the person who's like the innovative person, the person who can break through an impasse. And, I'm not going to talk to you about tactics. I don't have time and I don't have the expertise. You have the arrows in the quiver. You know what to use. I just emphasize that, money does count. And I've actually find, much to my surprise, that the mediator's number gambit works. I'm always surprised at that. I mean, but it does. The idea of like bringing people to a point, and it's kind of a third party assessment. This is what I think the case is worth. And I found over a lot of mediations that kind of moved people on both sides. And the non-monetary features, the ability to think beyond the money, as I talked about, can be really important. Is it an apology, non-disparagement, commercial freedom, things like that? Ask the people what really counts, as I said. Okay, just a couple more. Why does he keep looking at his watch, being patient? I told you why I couldn't be a mediator, why you all are so good at it. It takes a while for mediation magic to happen. You got to build relationships. You got to get kind of the emotion out of the room. And for me, 15-minute meetings drove me crazy when I was in the corporate world, but that's not mediation. It takes time. You got to listen. You got to validate. You got to move through impasses and not give up. And I remember, I love this mediator. We mediated for like 4 hours. And I said, this is where we got to get to. We got to get to X. The other side came in and said, no, but here's our line in the sand. It's Y. And I said, well, that's the end. And this mediator looked at me and she smiled and said, the end? This is a beginning. And we ended up settling that case. And I just remember thinking, I mean, this is this patience that people have, how it makes a difference, critically important. Next to the last thing is this idea of someone saying, we're out of here, they can go to hell, and start packing the bags to leave. I think mediation, a little bit like marriage, marriage don't go to bed angry. I think mediation don't end a mediation in anger. And the reason I say that is some of the most amazing, successful mediation outcomes I've had didn't take place on the day of mediation. It was a mediator who called a week, 2 weeks, a month later, who said, I was talking to the other side. I mean, it gives you that time and opportunity to go and talk to the principals. The mediator kind of said this is the number. Maybe we have to look at this thing differently. And you don't want to be the person to go, okay, can we restart things? Because you're left. Go, I'm not coming back. But a good mediator stays in touch, will call back, call to the outside counsel, occasionally call to me, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing to do. Call the client and say, I think there's a chance here. And so you know, it's never over. It's never over. It's never over. Final thing I'd say, then, because I'm eating up some time here, is you know, sometimes people say, wow, this mediator is really, really good. How come all of them can't be that good? And it is amazing to me, the differences I've seen over my 40 years in the practice of law and as a client. The ones that are really good and the ones really are less than great. And I think doing what you're doing here, I think you know, putting this out for discussion, sharing, it's a competitive business, I get it. But the idea of sort of setting that competitiveness aside and saying, let's talk about best practices. Let's talk about how we can rise the entire tide of our industry by sharing best practices and then teaching others on how to do it. And, you know, I'm not sure I've taught you anything on this, but, you know, that's the best I can do. And I talk to you from a client's perspective, the kinds of things that we as clients can do better, things that outside counsel can do better, things that mediators can do better. So I hope through all of this, there was a point or two that sort of resonated with you and you'll remember it at least until dinner tonight. So any questions? Anybody? Jeff, Jean, are you moderating that?
We will, and thank you so much, Tim. Fascinating. And one of the comments in the chat is, this is one of the best presentations I've ever heard. So I thought I would share that with you, and thank you for that.
Well, I have a new best friend. Thank you. Who had
Yes, Jeff's going to handle the questions here. So Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Tim, for a wonderful presentation. We have one question in the chat. Your views, the pros and cons of the opening joint session with everybody in the room. What are your views? I know it depends. What does it depend on?
Yeah, so I actually have a, you know, having you know, done, you know, little and big, if you will, I do think it is critically important to have that opening session. I think to have everybody in the room, if only to say hello to each other, to smile at each other, to shake hands. I think if you don't have that, if you have a wall and it's non-penetrated by the mediator, I think it's always like, who are these people on the other side? So I think having an opening session is critically important in terms of establishing familiarity and, you know, letting the guard down and realizing the real people on the other side. And sometimes you know them. I mean, I've sat across from general counsel, you know, you tell me I can't see them at the start of the day. Well, I probably wouldn't talk to them anyway, but it's a nice opportunity to sort of have a couple of us, a couple of GCs kind of make jokes, loosen this, you know, just kind of set the tone for the day because we're there. My experience is if you're forced to mediation, those don't often work out. Often, that's pretty, I hate to quantify it. Those are the harder ones to settle. If someone said the court ordered mediation, you got to go, okay. But if you do it voluntarily and you've gone through all the stuff I talked about, there's an interest and a willingness there that can be capitalized on. And I think bringing everybody in the room and talking, I think it's important. I think the question of what you do in that session, do you have opening statements? Do you not have opening statements? I know there are people who love opening statements and insist on them. I'm one who is a little less enthralled with opening statements, particularly in cases when both sides know everything there is to know about the other side's view. And those are the matters I attended, mediation, where I wouldn't tell the other side anything they don't know. But for them to hear from me in that session to go, I'm here in good faith. I brought my division president in good faith. We're here to talk about, I think that's an important message to send. But to start off with, you know, this case was filed in, you know, 2017, and that I just think it's often not worth it.
Tim, how do you plan for those joint sessions to make them the most productive? You talked about having phone calls with mediators before the mediation. Do you expect those, I assume, and do you initiate them when the mediator does not?
Yeah, I generally don't initiate them, and I don't talk to the other side before the mediation. I don't do that. And I don't insist that the mediator call. I think it's kind of the mediator's prerogative, if you will. If she wants to, to do it, she can. Because the other way I've seen it done is you go to the mediation and you're in separate rooms, and then the person comes in and talks to you about how the day shapes up, and then you get together for a joint session. You have an opportunity to share with the mediator either before the mediation or the days before or the morning of the mediation, kind of what's going to go on. So I don't precipitate it, if you will, but I think the idea of it just sitting down and getting some idea of what works with those personalities in this case, in this setting. It may have been a failed mediation before, this may be the third. I mean, so they're so different. And I think it's an opportunity for the mediator, for the benefit of the mediator, to know what the parties think would work best.
And Tim, how has that changed in the online environment?
Yeah, well, as I, it's interesting. I don't think Gene made this point so much. So I recently retired, and I said 2020 was a great year to be retired. So the whole idea of like Zoom and virtual and all of this kind of stuff, I'm an old school person, man. I mean, I can't. You put me in a virtual media, it's going to drive me crazy. But I know that's kind of the new normal. I hope it's not the permanent normal, if you will. I mean, I just think it's a harder thing to do. I think sitting, I mean, I don't need to, it's harder. You guys know better than I whether it's hard or not. But, what I would do in a mediation is in the middle of the mediation, I may go over to the general counsel on the other side and say, let's walk around the block. Let's you and me just kind of, where are we? And I think I do that with the mediator. And I think it's harder to do that in a virtual setting. And so clearly it's more challenging at the end of the day. But almost everything I told you about my views on what makes for successful mediation, you can do it virtually. It's how you as a mediator, how the client operates in that setting, and whether you're sitting there on a Zoom screen or you're sitting in a great big conference room, it doesn't really make any difference, because those are the critical things, in my view, the more critical things that will maximize chances of success.
And Tim, we have, I guess, time for about one more question. We have some very fine mediators on the line from backgrounds other than law. And have you had experience dealing with mediators who are not lawyers, and how is it different and how is it the same?
Yeah, I think it's the same, because the tools that the mediator uses to try to bring people together is the same. I don't care whether you're a lawyer or non-lawyer. I don't think many of us had, none of us majored in mediation in law school. So, lawyers don't have a special monopolistic view on kind of how it really works. So I think a lot of the tools and techniques and tactics and strategies and all of that, they're exactly the same. I do think there's an advantage in the setting, particularly in some of the complicated matters, that someone who's not a lawyer can come in and sort of bring a negotiating perspective. And I know some of those people, by the way, who are just really sophisticated negotiation experts, that you could negotiate a marriage dispute. You could negotiate, a matter in litigation. You could negotiate the purchase of a business. And I think there's a skill set out there that some non-lawyers have, that they can bring those skills to bear in kind of working through the differences. At the end of the day, you don't need to know everything about the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or the Markman hearing process or these kinds of things. You'd be able to bring people together in a government case or an IP case. You don't need that. You just need to somehow read the room and work through the personalities and think about what's going to work And, you know, as I said, you know, the JD degree doesn't give you necessarily a special province in all of that.
Tim, this is fantastic. You're a wealth of knowledge, and your willingness to be candid and share is just fantastic. So thank you so much. I know everybody on the line appreciates your comments very much. The people who will be watching the replay appreciate it very much. And I'm going to put in the chat again the cause which you support there in Kansas City, the City Union Mission. That's cityunionmission.org. And it was a wonderful presentation. Jean, back to you to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Tim.
All right, thanks, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you everybody for coming. You know, the United States had a time change this week, and I know some of you are signing on now and you missed it because of that time change. We set our clocks ahead. So you can catch this on the video, all right? And thank you all again, and thank you for your generous donations. Please let one of us know if and how much you might be donating so we can add it to the total. Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Bye.